Welcome back to another episode of Life in the Stands podcast. This is the 53rd episode of the podcast. We have Jake and Zach on today. We're going to talk about some NBA offseason stuff, do some fun NBA segments as well. Also talk about the Sixers a little bit because, we have to. But first, we're going to thank everyone for watching and listening on whatever platform you're on. Remember to like and subscribe on whatever platform you're on, whether it be TikTok or YouTube or Twitter, whatever it is. We really appreciate all of the support. So with that, we're going to jump into our first segment today. We're going to do another start bench cut. And the three players that we're going to do this with today are Klay Thompson, Ray Allen, and Reggie Miller. So a couple of the best sharpshooters in NBA history. And we're going to let Bender take it away with a start bench cut with those three names.
Yeah, this is tough. So, like you said, probably the top three best sharpshooters the league has ever seen. With that said, Reggie Miller played in an era where the three-point line was not as common as it is today when Steph Curry came along in the league. He shot it at a 39.5% clip, or I believe like a 40% clip, either way. Still pretty good for his era. And I think he belongs being in the start conversation. Now, if he was in today's eras, now we're going to compare, like always, we always compare, even in the GOAT conversation, right? Um, he would probably shoot a lot more threes, like he'd have a lot more attempts in today's era, based off of the way the league is playing. I don't know if that really changes his percentage much, if it goes to 38% or it goes up to 41%, that you don't know. Um, but I do think just giving him credit for what he did in that era um, is well worth it. He also has a lot more ability to score the ball, not just catch and shoot, which is why I'm going to cut Ray Allen. I think he was kind of a one-dimensional player. He was very athletic in his early ages, early years, but um, as he as he started playing with LeBron and the Celtics, there's a lot of catch and shoot. So I'm cutting him, which basically means I'm benching Klay Thompson at this point, just because I think he's a dynamic scorer that's within this group. He's not just a catch and shoot guy. We've seen Klay post up in the past, like smaller guards, hit you with a little shimmy and then little turnaround fade. So I like to give credit where credit's due, whether you're a dynamic scorer or played in an era where it wasn't common.
Yeah, I can respect all of that. But this will be fun because I do have a very different answer. So I'm gonna start Klay actually, and the reason I'm starting Klay is because of all of the career accolades. If you look across these three guys, he's been the biggest part of his team winning the most throughout any of these careers. The four championships of the Warriors and being really like the number two guy throughout all of those playoff series and those runs. So I like Klay Thompson here. I did also look at the career 3-point percentages for these guys, and like you said, it's a little bit tough with Reggie Miller in a different era, but Klay Thompson is the number one in career 3-point percentage. He's over 41% for his career as well. So I think it's like just over 41% for Klay. It's just over 40%, like right at 40 for Ray Allen, and then just under 40 for Reggie Miller. So again, that's a little bit of an era thing. But Klay Thompson is still, a whole percentage point above that. So that's significant enough to me. On top of him being a dynamic scorer, like you mentioned. So we'll talk about him going to the Mavs in a little bit too. That'll be a fun conversation. But I'm going to start Klay. I'm actually going to bench Ray Allen, and it's going to be some of the same conversations about winning. Even though he wasn't the guy on those teams, he was still a really pivotal player on those teams and did take them to the next level when they needed more spacing. And that was kind of during a time in the NBA where it was making that transition from being a paint packing league to a pace and space 3-point shooting league. And he had a lot to do with that transition too. Steph Curry really made it pop, but guys like Ray Allen during that time period, definitely had an impact on that culture as well. So I would cut Ray Allen or bench Ray Allen, and then I'd cut Reggie Miller just because of the lack of winning across his career. Again, it's a little bit of an era thing because he had to go against some of the best teams of all time too in his era and didn't have a lot of help when he was the main guy. Um, but because of that winning piece, I'm going to cut Reggie Miller. Still respectable, though. I feel like all your answers. I can see where you're coming from.
I feel like it's very hard to go wrong with any of these answers. And I know people are going to be in the comments being like, "Shut up, you're wrong, shut up." But it's besides the point.
Nobody
We
started
deal
Ray
with those
Allen.
kinds of guys every day on TikTok. So,
We're
which
in
will
agreement
eventually
that
have,
Ray Allen. We're in agreement that Ray Allen's not the starter, though.
yeah, we're in agreement that he's not the starter. I feel like if you talk about big moments and everything, all these guys have had those. Like Ray Allen, there's the shot. Klay Thompson, there's Game 6 Klay and going off and whatever else. And Reggie Miller with the choke sign.
Yep.
I don't know. But here's where you want to talk about success. Reggie Miller was the guy on that Pacers team. Ray Allen was the fourth guy on the Miami Heat team. He was the third guy on the
Mhm.
Celtics team. So I think that's where you can start talking. Klay Thompson was the number two guy, but still putting up 20 something points a game and doing more than just catch and shoot.
Right.
So there's a lot of conversations to be had within these three guys. Um, it's not taken away from them. It's more just who do you prefer? What kind of skill set do you prefer? Especially with me. Do you prefer the success that they've had, whether it's LeBron carrying or not? Um, but no, I think this is a good conversation. I'm not in complete disagreement, but at least we agree on some things.
Yeah, we agree on some things for sure. And with that, I think this would be a good time to transition to a conversation about Klay joining the Mavericks, because obviously this is a pretty big offseason move. I've seen now that it's going to be a part of like some wacky five-team trade to like help the Klay deal go through and like help a couple of these like small deals that have all kind of been like waiting in the wings, just kind of all happen. Might even be roped in with like the Buddy Hield deal and a bunch of
Yeah.
different stuff. But Klay Thompson's joining the Mavericks, a 3 year, $50 million deal. I think this is, significant. And just pointing back to one part of that last conversation too, I think Klay might be the best defender out of those three players. Because he's been guarding top perimeter players all throughout those playoff runs as well. And he's probably lost a step there recently, but still a very smart and savvy defender. So I think, you basically replaced Tim Hardaway Jr. with Klay Thompson. This is the team that won the West last year. I don't see how they can't be at least one of the top two or three favorites coming into this upcoming season.
Say top three favorites?
Yeah, I mean, what, like Timberwolves,
Okay, just stop for a
Timberwolves,
second.
Nuggets, and them.
Okay, so here's what's happened. You just forgot about the Thunder, who just got Caruso and Hartenstein. So the number one seed just got better. So we got to think about that. I think the T Wolves just got better. I know they just drafted and traded for Rob Dillingham, but that's an improvement in my eyes. The Nuggets still a question mark because they lost KCP, but they still have the core guys there, so I'm not really too worried. They can kind of plug some guys in, see what happens,
Right.
but and they do have a reigning MVP on that team, so it is what it is. But like, I think they're still like a 4 or 5 slot where they are right now. Like Klay Thompson to me is taking over the Derrick Jones Jr. spot, so I think you're losing a little bit of defense at that spot, but I think you're gaining a lot of floor spacing and a lot of shooting. The Mavs were not known for defense for the first half of the year until they got PJ Washington and they got Gafford to be able to have some kind of rotation there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if defense will really be necessary because you still have those guys. So I think they are better just from the floor spacing for Kyrie and Luca, but I don't think they're better than any of those other teams. And I know they beat the Thunder. Like I know they beat some of these teams, but I just don't see them getting past them.
Yeah, and they beat the Timberwolves too. So I feel like, the Mavericks are one of those teams that even going into last season, and I was one of them, like we saw the Mavericks as like a 6, 7 seed, not going to be like super competitive, maybe get into the second round again. They always give the Clippers a run for their money,
Yeah.
but I'm almost like not going to fall for it again this year. Like the combination of Luca and Kyrie when it gets into playoff time wins series, and you add Klay Thompson into that mix. If they can stay healthy, I just feel like there's a better feel for me come playoff time for that. You're bringing in a 4-time NBA champion into that fold. I don't see how that doesn't help propel you further, but it's hard to disagree with the other teams getting better too. I mean, that's the fun of this NBA offseason is a lot of teams have gotten better. So
You know how I look at the Mavs? Like I look at the Mavs like a wild card team. You know who that is as of recent years? The Miami Heat. They can make the big run, but you don't know what they're going to do, actually. So I think that's kind of the spot they're in, and it's kind of we're not going to believe it until we see it. I know we just saw it. Like I know we just saw it, but we're not going to believe it till we see it again. And it's the same thing with the Warriors when they won their last championship too. Like nobody believed it until they got there. like, oh crap, they might actually still be here, and they beat the Celtics. Like they still
Did they
they
beat
have
the
an it
Celtics or
factor,
did the Celtics lose?
both.
Yeah.
Uh, but no, like they have that it factor, but there's so much competition. Like the Heat have to go through the Bucks, Celtics, Sixers, Knicks, some of the other young teams I'm not going to mention at this time, and then you got the Western Conference. It's 1 through 8, 1 through 7 in that conference that could probably make it.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it's a good point. It's a good point. And another fun conversation to have would be just talking about which conference is looking stronger at this point, the East or the West, because I think that'd be a really fun conversation to have. But no, I mean, it feels like every team has gotten better this offseason. You even look at it
for
like
sure.
the Pelicans, bringing
Yeah.
DeJounte Murray, like,
But
you
like
know,
we're still waiting on a lot of moves too. So we're still waiting on Brandon Ingram to possibly move. We're waiting on Lowry Markkanen to move. We're waiting on DeMar DeRozan, maybe Zach LaVine, depending on what the Bulls
yeah,
decide to do over there. Like
yeah,
we have a lot of like I want to call them second tier guys that are
yeah.
still all-star caliber, like second tier guys that are being ready to go to different teams.
Well, and
So
even like a lot of minimum to mid-level exception guys that are waiting it out. You're looking at
yes,
Kyle Lowry, Caleb Martin, Gordon Hayward. Like there's a lot of Robert
Gary Gary
Covington,
Gary
Mark
Trent Jr. is
Morris.
a big name too.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot out there still, and I think this is another good transition to bring us into our last conversation of the day. Do we think the Sixers have enough to compete with the top teams in the East, the Celtics, the Knicks, the Heat when they have good years? What's your take on that now that we've brought in PG, re-signed Maxi, made a couple of moves so far?
Yeah, so if you talk about those two teams in comparison, there's one thing that we don't have compared to them, and that is depth. So we're kind of just waiting on these last couple of moves. Like if we end up getting a Kyle Lowry or trade for a Lowry Markkanen, I believe we were looking at Martin and some of those guys as well, Haywood Highsmith.
Right.
So we're looking at like the fillers, which is like our 8 through 10 guys, more than likely. But like Andre Drummond's a starting caliber center. I don't care what people say. He's going to come off our bench. Let's say Embiid's on a rest night because you know that's going to happen at some point. He's still going to be a good plug-in for our team. Oubre was probably the best signing from last year, and we re-signed him. And I still believe in Paul George. I know people are going to talk about injury history for everybody on the Sixers at this point, but I still think all of the conversations that can be had about any team is, oh, they can do this if they're healthy. Like we just did it with the Mavs. We just did it with the Mavs. They can do this if they're healthy. I think if the Sixers get 1 or 2 more guys, let's say it's Kyle Lowry and Caleb Martin, just like the low tier guys at this point, veteran minimums, whatever they want to be signed to. I think we can beat the Knicks. I think that's definitely a thing. Um, and I know it's going to probably backfire because the Knicks have the Nova Knicks over there. So continuity is a thing. I think that's why we would lose to the Celtics. They have everything from defense to offense to height to shot blocking, everything. I just think the Celtics are our kryptonite, and the Knicks would have to run into them first before we run into them first. So,
Yeah. I would love to see a Nick Celtics series, both teams at full strength in next year's playoffs, so that the Sixers will only have to play one of those teams moving forward. But I mean, my take on this is kind of similar. It's just that it's too early in the offseason to be able to tell
yeah,
because I mean, we just in the previous segment talked about how many pieces there are still to fall. And I mean, we could go everywhere from getting a guy like Lowry Markkinen all the way down to like, oh, we're gonna bring in Haywood Highsmith and
yeah,
Adam Bona is going to get minutes for us.
yeah.
Like it could go everywhere in between. So I just feel like it's still a little bit too early. I do think that, like the top level of the roster, the top level talent on the Sixers is good enough to compete with any team in the NBA. But that's been
Oh, yeah.
true with Embiid the last 2, 3, 4 years, like also. So, like, but you also mentioned the Celtics and kind of their the way that they play and how they have everything covered. I don't really see what player you bring in if you're the Sixers that's going to put you over the top if that guy is an 8 to 10 rotation player. Because teams like the Celtics and the Knicks, they're also only playing like 6 guys in the playoffs. Like they have 4 guys that play 44 plus minutes, and then the other like 20 minutes that they need are covered by like 1 or 2 guys. So that's the
So
other difficult part is like, is Embiid gonna play 45 minutes for a whole 6 game series? That's what we
so
need.
I'm glad you said that. So that's why we have Drummond, first off. So I'm happy that we have the depth, but it depends on what you believe in, right? Like the Celtics play seven, no more than 8 guys if there's foul trouble during the playoffs. I think
Right.
our depth is going to be more important for the regular season just to try and stay healthy. Because I believe Paul George will be a part of the load management, not just Embiid. So
Yeah.
you have to think about that.
He's gonna be
If we
35.
can, if we can trade our first round picks that we still have, like we didn't use those yet. We still have value in those picks. If we can go out and make some kind of trade, that would be cool. Like we need probably one more starting caliber guy. Doesn't have to be a superstar. He could be a third star. And I think we could compete with the Celtics. Now, there's one guy sitting out there that I really want because I think it's a sneaky pick. I want Chris Middleton. I just want another bucket getter that you could plug into the starting lineup. I think a Maxey, Middleton, Oubre, Paul George, and Embiid starting lineup would go crazy because Oubre and PG can both play defense. You just throw Middleton on whichever guy you don't want, like the crappier
Middleton's
guy
still
of the
lengthy.
bunch.
Middleton's still 6'7".
He can still play
Lengthy.
defense, but you're still going to throw those other guys on
Oh yeah,
Tatum
he's
and
gonna be
Brown.
guarding the worst. He's gonna be guarding the fourth option.
Yes. So like I think there would have to be some okay, who's the number one option? Who's the number two option? Like you'd have to have the talks in the locker room of like where are you at? Like what do we expect of you?
It'd be Oubre
But
and PG. Oubre's gonna guard the best guy. PG's gonna guard the
yes,
second best guy because PG's gonna have to be a little bit more offensively, right?
but it's firepower to go against the
Yeah.
Celtics. Like it's just
Middleton
firepower, dude.
Middleton's an interesting name. You have mentioned Middleton before, and I've liked the idea of it. I mean, I love it too because it pulls him away from the Bucks, right? So
Yeah.
that's like the other flip side of it is you take away a bucket getter that's on that roster. We haven't even talked about the Bucks talking about top teams in the
They're
league.
a they're a whole other conversation though, because they're gonna give the Dame thing another try. And I think it's gonna fail miserably because they don't have Middleton. They're probably not gonna get Malik Beasley back. Um, Brooke
Even Brooke
Lopez
Lopez
is
has been floated.
in
Yeah,
trade talks. Like
yeah,
it just looks like a complete blow up, and it's looking like Giannis might ask out eventually.
yeah. Which he like they won the championship there in Milwaukee. Doc Rivers was brought in, so to me that's kind of like you're publicly giving up. But anyway, we'll let Bender say one last piece and then we'll wrap up.
Real quick question. We asked if we could compete with the Knicks and the Celtics. If the answer like if the answer is yes, do we think they're actually going to get to the finals, or do you think like that's basically what the question is, right? Like we're talking about the Knicks and the Celtics. Those are the two teams you have to get by at this point. Do we think the Sixers can A get past the second round, B get past the conference finals, B do anything in the NBA finals? Like what are we actually looking at here? Because I think we're looking at conference finals and then we see who we play. Because I think that's where we're at with the top 6 or 7 guys we're talking about at this
Mm-hmm.
point,
Mm-hmm.
pending depth. Like, what do you see?
Yeah. I think, I would love to say that we make it past the second round, but I feel like I need to see what else comes out of our roster. Because if it's just a couple of minimum guys added to this, it's just Kyle Lowry, Caleb Martin, Haywood Highsmith. Like I don't know if that gets it done. Because the likelihood that we have to play the Knicks or the Celtics or even like the Pacers or the Bucks or the Heat in that second round, like the likelihood that we have to play one of those teams is way too high. And if we don't bring in just a little bit more firepower, I just don't see it happening because at that point, it's also hard to imagine the team being completely healthy. I will say the one caveat to that before we wrap up is Maxi could have another breakout year. Like he's not done developing.
True.
He's not done getting better. So he was a 24, 26 points per night, kind of guy.
It,
I could see him and Embiid kind of overpassing each other, and Embiid becoming that like 25 and 15 with like 7 assists, and Maxi becoming that 30-point scorer. I could see that transition happening. If that kind of thing happens, then the playoff conversation becomes different. But
and to add on top, Paul George has had his best shooting season by percentages last year.
right, which I mean, he's only going to benefit playing with Maxey and Embiid. It's very different from playing with Kawhi and Harden. And, it's just very different, especially with Nick Nurse's schemes. Like him, like Joel Embiid playing as a hub with Paul George, dribble handoff, back around, like all that kind of stuff. I think it's gonna be dirty. But that's another episode of Life in the Stands podcast. Thanks again, everyone, for watching and listening. Please make sure to like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on, and we'll see you on the next episode.